Good evening everybody. Thanks to Emma for the introduction. My name is Mike and I'm one of the founding members of Technorama. I've worked as a freelance engineer for many government and private companies over the past 55 years. Welcome to Tech Tuesday, a joint presentation of CTMO and Technorama.
Welcome to tonight's presentation, The Perfect Joint, Soldering Made Simple.
Today we're going to have a look at how to join two wires together in a strong and reliable insulated connection. Then we'll have a look at how to connect wires to plugs and sockets without any shorts. We'll look at some finer details of mounting components and wires onto printed circuit boards. And just to finish up, we'll have a look at repairing some faults on loudspeakers and headphones. Before we commence to learn how to solder, we need a few pieces of equipment, some of which you may already have in your toolbox, others you may not. Firstly, you'll need a good quality low to medium powered soldering iron, 20 to 60 watts. I use an adjustable iron with a temperature range of 200 to 450 degrees Celsius. Of course, we will need some solder. A tin lead alloy solder, also known as soft solder, is 60% tin and 40% lead alloy and is suitable for high quality repair work. Solders that have internal flux greatly simplify the soldering process without exposing the user to dangerous acidic paste and are available from most electrical outlets or hardware stores. Solders available in short lengths up to several meters or 500 gram reels. We will talk more about lead-free solder directly. You will also need a pair of wire cutters. Good quality wire cutters are handy for trimming component leads and wire ends. You will also need a pair of long-nosed pliers, a valuable tool for holding hot components and bending wires. One of the most valuable pieces of equipment is a soldering stand, a substitute for a second set of hands and very handy for holding components while you solder. From time to time it's necessary to clean the tip of the soldering iron. A small piece of sponge attached to the solder stand, dampened with water, is ideal for this purpose. Molten solder and flux are very dangerous, even when handled carefully. Their melting temperatures are almost twice the temperature of boiling water. Hot solder looks the same as cold solder, so be very careful. Good quality safety glasses should be worn at all times when soldering. There is a term used while soldering that you may not be familiar with: tinning. This is the process of coating bare wire with solder to enable an even flow of solder over a completed connection. When you remove the insulation from wire, or if it's uninsulated and it is brown in colour, then it is not tinned. If it is silver in colour, then it's been tinned during manufacture. Without tinning, the solder may only partially cover the joint and result in poor electrical connectivity. Tinning means to make hot solder flow onto copper wire. The reason that you would want to tin wire is to ensure the best possible electrical connection. Apply a small amount of solder to the iron tip. Put the soldering iron under the wire to be tinned. Now put your rosin core solder on top. Because the soldering iron with a small amount of solder is underneath, it will transfer heat and melt your solder onto the wire. When the heat successfully transfers your solder to the wire, you will see a puff of smoke and the solder will flow. Now the wire is properly tinned and can be connected to other components or circuit boards. One of the most common faults that persons soldering succumb to is attempting to tin and solder a connection in one action. Remember, tin first, then make the connection. Okay, let's get started with the first of our projects, soldering two wires together. Turn the soldering iron on and wait a few minutes for the tip to get to the required operating temperature. Around 340 degrees C is suitable for most electronic work. Strip approximately 12 to 15 mm of insulation from each wire. Cut a 20 mm length of heat shrink and slide it over one of the wires, with the insulation in one hand and the copper wires in the other, and twist the wires together firmly. Place one wire in each of the clips of the solder stand with the bare wires overlapping and twisted together. Clean the soldering iron tip and then apply the soldering iron and the solder together to ensure the solder flows smoothly over all exposed wires. Slide the heat shrink over the joint, applying heat to complete the installation. Provided this method has the wires twisted well together and the solder has flowed well over the exposed wire, the joint can stand a considerable amount of stress while still providing a good connection. However, NASA has published a paper detailing a simple but much more secure method connecting two wires. Known as the Western Union or linesman splice, the connection offers considerable more strength than twisted wires.
Okay, So we know you're expecting a video from Jimmy DiResta. He wasn't able to produce one this week because of an issue that flooded his workshop, but he'll be back with us soon. Instead, we have a cool technique to share in its place, splicing a wire to NASA specifications. If you've ever needed an incredibly strong wire splice, or you just wanted to create anything on your workbench that would pass NASA's rigorous standards, you'll need a lineman splice. The lineman splice was developed during the days of the telegraph for wires that need to be under tension. Properly made, the lineman splice should be stronger than any other part of the wire. Here's how to make one. Strip about 1 inch of the insulation from the ends of the wires to be spliced, and then tin the leads with solder. Make a 90-degree bend in each lead, and place the crooks of these bends into one another. Begin to twist one of the leads around the other, keeping your twist as tight as possible. You want the coils touching each other while making constant contact with the lead it's twisting around. Coil the other lead in the exact same manner. Trim off any excess ends so that the splice has no sharp protrusions. Once you're satisfied with the coils, apply solder to the entire splice. Ensure that the solder is not only covering all contacts of the splice, but is also present between the coils. Now, before we go to space with this splice, let's check out our work against the NASA standard. The conductor shall be pre-tinned. There shall be at least 3 turns around each conductor, and the wrap shall be tight with no gaps between adjacent turns. The wrap shall not overlap, and the ends of the wrap shall be trimmed flush prior to soldering to prevent protruding ends. Conductor shall not overlap the insulation of the other wire. Solder shall wet all elements of the connection. The solder shall fillet between the connection elements over the complete periphery of the connection. While the lineman splice may be over-engineered for the needs of most wire joins, it's a great skill to have when you need an incredibly strong splice.
At this stage, we might stop to see if we have any questions, and then we'll proceed directly onto some videos to have a look at various aspects. This video is in 2 parts. The first part shows how to insert components into a circuit board. The second part shows you how to solder them in place. Insert an IC socket into the board and bend the 4 legs over to hold it. It stays in place. Solder the legs in place. Insert a transistor into the board just about 1/8 of an inch through. See the legs just stick through? Bend them over to hold it in place. Soldering a resistor into place. Resistors go all the way through with the whole leg underneath. Bend this leg over to hold it. Soldering the resistor. Notice how fast it goes. Press the iron quickly against the metal pin and the board donut at the same time while feeding solder. It only takes a quick second for the solder to melt to both parts. Now I'm making the solder joint, joining 2 parts together with solder. Notice the smooth solder joints. When finished, cut all the legs flush with the board.
Hi, John Hess here of FilmmakerIQ.com. I'm going to show you a neat little trick of how to make your own XLR cables, or how to solder your own XLR cables. This is great if you need to make a new cable, or if you want to repair that cable that just got broken, maybe got run over by a truck, the heads got crushed, or it got snapped in half, or a dog chewed through it. This is the same technique you would use to fix a broken XLR as it is to make a new one. So let's get started. Let's go through the parts we're going to need. We're going to need a soldering iron, which is right here. This is what's called a extra hands, and it's actually very useful for holding things while you're working. You're going to need solder. This is 6040 rosin core solder. You're going to need something to cut the wires with, or strip the wires like a strip. You're going to need some new XLR heads, which you can purchase on eBay. Very easy to purchase. Now this is the female end right here, and this is the male end. You can kind of think of it in terms of anatomy. Males have a little thing that projects, and female has things that take. And then we've got a little cable tester here. You don't need this, but if you're going to do a lot of cables, you really want to get one, because If you don't have it perfectly wired, you can damage equipment. So let's put that aside first. I'm going to go ahead and plug in my soldering iron so that it can get hot. Let's take a look at our pieces right here. Let's go ahead and disassemble them. There we go. And the way the male side comes out is it actually just falls right out in the front. Notice how the male side has no notches. And you'll notice the female side, again putting the screws safely away, has a little notch right here on the outside. Let's take a look at the actual connections themselves. So an XLR is a 3-pin connection. And if you look very closely on, let's see if I can get this on a camera here. On an XLR, you see you have 3 numbers, a 1, 2, and 3. 1 is always going to be your ground wire, 2 and 3 are your hot and cold wires. Now you want to keep that in mind because they actually swap depending on the male and female side. See, the female version has the one on the right, and the male, if you can barely see that, has the one on the left. Okay, let's get our cable ready. Front end to cut the cable. Now we're going to strip the ends of the cable and we're going to tin the wires. To strip the cable, we use our wire cutters. They have a little stripping. I'm going to just take off, about a little bit more than ½ an inch. Roughly 2 centimeters if you're a metric here. I'm just going to take off about ½ an inch worth of the rubber insulation on the outside. And remove the rubber. On this cable yourself, you will see a lot of little thin wires. This is the insulation. Or this is the shielding, I mean. Grounding. What you want to do is you want to push it all to the side, like that, and then twist it so that it makes its own little wire. Then you want to take the paper and cloth insulation around these 2 smaller wires, take some scissors, and just remove that with some scissors. Now we want to strip the remaining black and white wire. Strip the black and white wire, just go ahead and, again, we don't really need that much here, just maybe 1/4 of an inch. And that right there is a properly stripped XLR end. So we'll do the exact same thing to the other end of the cable. Now that we have all the wires stripped, it's time to tin each individual wire. And by tinning, what we mean is we want to put a little bit of solder on the end of the wire to help facilitate connecting all the wires together. So I'm going to start with this black wire. I've got my soldering iron here sitting on a stand. It's been sitting on it for a while. I think it's pretty hot by now. I'm just going to touch the red wire to it until it gets kind of hot and try to melt some solder right on the red wire. There we go, and you see how that just sucks up the solder like that? You don't need very much solder. There we go. Now this shield here, just really need the tip. I'm just going to get the tips nice and hot and add a little bit of solder to it. Okay, and that is a properly tinned tip. Go ahead and do the other end while we're here. Insulation wire and a tinned red and black wire. What I'm going to do now is put a little bit of solder in each one of these little pockets. Be careful where you hold the connector at this point, because these are very good at distributing heat, and you can hurt yourself. So I'm holding it on the side here where the plastic sort of is. Okay, so just put a little bit of solder in each one of the little pockets. We'll do the same thing with this one. This one you have to be very careful because you don't want to hold it at the prongs. You want to hold it right here on the plastic point. Now we need to connect the wire to the pin. Let's go ladies first. Now this is very important. It's very easy to screw this part up. Always put on the end cap before you would try to solder the parts together. I've done this. I made this mistake many times. You have to tear the whole thing apart and start all over. So it's good to just start this right in the first place. The side with the notch is the female side. So we want to slide that. Put the cable through there, through the little rubber housing, slide it down, and now we've got 1 on the right side, 2 on the left, 3 at the top. So let's track that back. So one will be this right here, this connector. 3 is this middle connector, and then 2 is this connector over here. I'm going to go ahead and put this into my third hands clip. You can also use like a paper clip to hold it. Again, you don't want to be holding this thing because it will get pretty darn hot. So let's put the wires. So 1 will be on this side. We'll make 2 red and we'll make black 3. Doesn't matter which one is 2, which one is 3. It just matters that you stay consistent. As long as you're consistent. If red is 2, then the other side, that means red needs to be 2. Don't mix and match. This is not a mixing match kind of a thing. And then, since we've already tinned the connections, it's really just a matter of melting the solder and getting it, and then letting it sit there until it cools down. It usually takes about a second or 2 to cool. So go ahead and push down on number 2 here. Go ahead and melt solder. A couple seconds, and we've got a connection. Now to our number 3 on the top. Black cable to the top number 3. Go ahead and get that in position. Melt. A nice strong connection. And it's melted. Got a connection there. And then our final one, number 1, which is the shielding, and just hold it till we melt. Get both wires hot. Let's go ahead and clamp down this little clamp right here, and you want to kind of have it holding on to the rubber insulation. I'm just going to use my cutters here and just squeeze it down so it's holding on to the rubber. That way there's not, the tension's really on the rubber part and not on our soldering work. Then you turn it to the right proper, so you get the proper notchings and line it up in place. Go ahead and drop your screw back into the and we will tighten the screw. We won't go crazy like we did, like the guy did when he first sold it to me. Okay, so the female end is done. Now we're going to do the same thing now with the other end of the cable. Don't forget, put the cover on first. If you don't do that, you're going to take the whole thing apart and start over. This one, the male side's a little bit trickier because you don't want to touch the prongs on this side. Remember what I said earlier, you got to make sure we figure out which ones are 1, 2, and 3. In this case, the 1 is going to be on the side closest to me. And on the other end, it ended up being on the side furthest away from me. And applying heat. Double checking now. It's okay that the insulating touches the metal part of the connector. That's all fine and dandy. Go ahead and line up the holes. There's a little tiny notch. You see it right there. That helps you line up this sleeve, the end of the male one. Just go ahead and pull it back until the holes line up, and go ahead and plop it into the hole. Give it a tightening. And now it's time to check to make sure what we've done is correct. This is a microphone cable tester. It's capable of testing all kinds of cables. The reason I got this thing was because I was trying to test the cable I was fixing, and I basically wired it improperly, and it destroyed part of my audio recorder. So I had to take that in and get it repaired. So I vowed to never have that happen again. So I bought a cable tester. You can do it with a camera. You can do it with a microphone or a mixer. Again, if you don't have it properly wired, you could be in trouble. So I just don't recommend it. If you're going to do this often, buy one of these, and they're good because the thing with DIY cables is they tend sometimes to go bad because our soldering maybe.
So what I have here today is an older pair of headphones, and they're not anything that you'd actually want to buy yourself. They're cheap and they don't sound that great, but I only keep them because they're kind of like a memory, I guess you could say. They're old, 20 years, so I like to keep them. They're the COS TD60. Maybe I'm wrong, it might be a little younger than that, but still. Point is that what's happened to these is that the right channel has finally gone. When it first happened, I was thinking to myself, oh geez, I finally got to throw these out in the garbage, but you've probably seen this has been done many a time before. The jack has gone once again. This is the reason why the right side doesn't work. So tip of advice for any of you who actually have headphones and one of the channels goes, what you do is you crank up the volume to maximum, and if you can hear it slightly out of the ear on this side and that jack is in, then what you've probably done is the actual speaker itself has blown. However, if you don't hear it, but you move the jack around and you start to hear it every now and then, that means that it's in the jack in itself, and this is a really easy fix if that's the case. Otherwise, if it's the speaker one and it's just kind of there but it's not there, then you're gonna have to get a new speaker, and that's really complicated. But for this case, I moved this jack around and it was working perfectly fine in some cases. So it's just a loose wire inside of here, and that's pretty easy to fix. So first things first, what you're going to want to do is you're going to actually want to open this up. If yours is new, it's going to be a little harder to get open, but mine's been done many a time, so it's relatively easy. So, as you can see, little loose wire we have right here. And that is the reason why we didn't have our right channel. See, it's red for right. Looks like our ground is connected properly. Yeah, we got our left. Yep. So I think what we just need to do is we just need to resolder that point right there, which will be another fast forward. So I've desoldered the wires from this jack right here, but the unfortunate part about this kind of wire is that it's rather odd in that it's not like you can just resolder it. The coloring itself and there's fibers in the middle kind of interrupt the flow and make things annoying, so you can't simply resolder them right directly back into the point. So what you have to do is you actually have to untwist these and then cut the fibers on the inside and then sand them back a little so that the copper is exposed before soldering them. Otherwise you're not going to make proper contact with the jack itself, and you won't hear anything come out of your headphones unless you turn it up all the way. Even then it'll sound disgusting. So let's go ahead and do that. So now, as you may or may not be able to see, I've actually stripped back the wire, or untwisted the wire to a point where you can kind of make out these white center points. And these white center points aren't conductive whatsoever. So we're actually it's a process that I'm gonna do off camera, but you actually have to bend back the copper part that is colored, or isn't colored and is shiny, and then trim off these fibers, because these fibers are absolutely useless. And then what you want to do is you want to sand them off, which I'll show later, and twist it back together. Followed by that, then you can get to soldering. It's quite a pain and an annoying process, but whatever works. So I've taped down the little point right there, and we've got our little wires all soldered out. I took the spindles out of there. There's the little remains. You probably can't see them. Low def camera, but whatever. I took out the little plastic fibers and then rewound them together, give it a little bit of sandpaper, and then soldered it again. It's a pain, but that's what you have to do with these lower quality wires. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and fast forward in time. Well, for you it's going to be fast forward, and just solder these to the points. Alright, so everything's soldered back together now, as you can see, and I can only hope it works. So I'll be right back to you. I'll see you in a second. So here's the final test of the headset. I've got it all hooked up to the radio here. As you can hear, there's the right channel. There's the left. This headphone has been restored successfully, so it's probably got another 10 years on its life right there. So what I also did off camera was I just put some shrink wrap around that. The lighting's a little off in here, so it's hard to see, but I put a little bit of shrink wrap around that so it hides the whole thing. You can pick shrink wrap up pretty much anywhere on eBay, etc., those Radio Shacks and whatnot. And basically you just heat it up with either a heat gun or whatever kind of thing that generates heat. Anyways, hope you found this somewhat useful. That's how you fix a broken left or right channel on your earshot. Usually, if it's sometimes it can get a little more advanced, like I said, if it's sort of dying and it's not really in this, it can change, but still, it's a good method. Hope you found this somewhat useful. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you next time.